Hello, folks. I'm Tim Pell of Beth Tikkun Messianic Fellowship. Welcome to our new series, 12 Voices, One God, a walk through the minor prophets. Together, we'll be exploring the texts of the minor prophets, those 12 shorter books that are grouped together primarily because of their length and scope, but not their importance and value. We'll be moving through them in canonical order, but the Jewish canon, which is slightly different than the Christian canon, but still works together. These prophets, though diverse in style and context, collectively point to God's character and redemptive plan, culminating in Yeshua as the prophet and priest and king. They are God's mouthpiece to a wayward people, but their messages find their fullest echo in Messiah. Before we get into the text this morning, which will be Obadiah, again, that's not in canonical order, but I'll get to that in a minute. I want to go through some big ideas that will resonate through this entire series, and then we'll get into the text. So, first big idea is arguably the most important idea in human history. In Dennis Prager's book, Rational Bible Exodus, there is an excellent essay titled The God of the Torah, the most important idea in world history. In it, Prager lists 15 unique and important aspects of the God introduced by the Torah. Here are a few. The God introduced by the Torah is the first God in history to have been entirely above and beyond nature. We are to govern our lives by moral law, not by human nature. The God introduced by the Torah morally judges every human being. There had never been a concept like this before, and it's also the reason why the Jewish people are so hated. The God introduced by the Torah gives every individual unprecedented self-worth. Since all humans are created in God's image, each of us is infinitely valuable. The God introduced by the Torah means there is ultimate meaning to existence and to each of our lives. And these next two have the most to do with what we'll be covering in the prophets. The just and good God introduced by the Torah gives humanity hope. One of these hopes is that there is ultimate justice. The belief that God judges human beings, both the good and the evil, will get what they ultimately deserve. Even though justice is rarely served in this world, there is a good God who will ultimately set things right. And finally, the God introduced by the Torah made human moral progress possible. In the words of New York University historian Henry Bamford Parks, the Judeo-Christian religions, starting with the Torah, repudiated the cyclic view of history held by all other ancient peoples and affirmed that it was a meaningful process leading to the gradual regeneration of humanity. So then came the Torah and its God, and life was no longer to be a cycle, but a spiral ascending toward a moral goal. The second big idea has to do with how justice and mercy play out in world religions. It can be said that all world religions amount to an aspect of mercy and justice. Let's briefly go through a few of the world's major religions and how they approach the tension between justice and mercy. First, consider the Eastern religions. At its core, Buddhism sees existence as a cycle. Birth, death, rebirth, driven by karma. Justice here is impersonal, almost mathematical. Your actions determine your next life, no exceptions. Mercy? It's subtle. There's no divine figure doling it out. Instead, compassion is a tool to escape suffering. Enlightenment, breaking free to a higher plane, is rare and hard-won, leaning Buddhism toward a justice-heavy framework. You reap what you sow relentlessly across lifetimes. Similarly, with Hinduism, karma again rules, but the divine is pluralistic. Millions of gods, like Vishnu or Kali, embody aspects of existence. Justice is cosmic. Your caste, your life's trials reflect past deeds. These Eastern religions are wholly just in that you will always get what you deserve. This is justice at the expense of mercy. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Islam. Here, the mercy of Allah is at the expense of justice. He forgives, but he does so arbitrarily, and that his law is not accounted for. There is no justice for when the law is broken. His forgiveness goes against his law because the price is never really paid. This is mercy at the expense of justice. Then there's the Judeo-Christian religions of the Bible, where God's perfect justice is always meted out, and his mercy is manifest ultimately in the cross, where Yeshua is given what we deserve, because perfect justice demands a price. And through mercy, Yeshua got what we deserve on the cross, but by grace, we get what we don't deserve. Perfect balance. It's not arbitrary like Islam's unaccounted divine will, nor is it cyclical like Buddhism's karma. It balances the scales and opens arms. On the one end, implacable karma with mercy as a distant hope. On the other, justice and mercy arbitrarily meted out. At the fulcrum, law and love are intertwined, justice served and mercy won. Okay, let's now look at the prophets themselves as people. In his book, The Prophets, by Abraham Joshua Heschel, something I think should be required reading of any student of the Scriptures, he offers a profound and nuanced understanding of what qualifies someone as a prophet, emphasizing their spiritual sensitivity, moral passion, and unique relationship with God, rather than a set of criteria. Heschel views the prophet not merely as a predictor of the future, but as a person who experiences a divine encounter and serves as a messenger of God's will, often in opposition to societal norms. Heschel stresses that prophets are individuals who are called by God. This calling is not something they seek, but an overwhelming experience of divine presence that interrupts their lives. They are, quote, struck by the glory of God. It's more like a wallop, if you ask me. Prophets, according to Heschel, are deeply concerned with righteousness and justice. They are not detached mystics, but individuals who feel the weight of human suffering and injustice acutely. He notes that their role is to confront society, kings and priests and the people, with God's demand for ethical behavior. Prophets are willing to stand alone against the tide of popular opinion or power. They are often unpopular, bearing messages that challenge the status quo. They are bold in speaking the truth, even at great personal risk. Prophets are personally invested in their message. They internalize God's concern for humanity. This often leads to anguish as they bear the burden of both divine disappointment and human failure. Prophets possess a heightened awareness of the divine presence in the world, seeing beyond the surface of events to their spiritual significance. Heschel's definition is less about formal credentials and more about the existential and spiritual reality of the prophet's life. The prophet's qualification is ultimately rooted in their profound encounter with the transcendent, which compels them to act as a bridge between the divine and the human. These are people, men and some women, caught in the crosshairs of divine justice and mercy, two forces so massive and intertwined that they can't help but seem unhinged to the rest of us. It's like they're staring into the sun, too terrible to look at, but too beautiful to look away. The prophets aren't just delivering messages, they're living the collision of God's holiness and compassion, and it marks them. They're not cool, detached orators. They're seized by a God whose strictness could crush and whose mercy could remake the world. Picture the prophets as men trembling under the weight of what they've seen: justice that levels mountains, mercy that raises the dead. All those fragmented, wild glimpses ultimately find their coherence in Yeshua, the prophet who doesn't just speak God's word, but is the word, balancing justice and mercy on the cross. He's not overwhelmed like the others because he's the source they're pointing to. Yet he still enters the madness of our world to fulfill it. I just had a conversation this morning with a couple friends of mine about this topic, and it reminded me of a topic that is trending right now in many circles, both religious, Christian, and secular, that perhaps we're living in a matrix. And this is the kind of idea that blows people's minds. It shifts their paradigm. What's interesting, and one of my friends that I was speaking with today pointed this out, the people of the book, people of the Bible, have known this for quite a while. We just don't call it the matrix. It is the spiritual reality, and that spiritual reality is God. The prophets shift their paradigm from a belief that God is an object of their existence, and they are the subject, to understanding that God is the subject and we are the object. We are in Him, not He in or outside or around us. And that is enough to drive a person mad, or seemingly so. So why prophecy? What's the importance here? An Israel that fails is a serious problem. The people and the land, cherished and chosen by the Creator of the universe for the purpose of transforming the world, is held to a high standard, and their failure has greater consequences than what we might think of or see on the surface. Whatever a prophet predicts can also be proven wrong if the behavior of man changes. Many times, prophets basically say, punishment is coming unless you change. If you are to help revolutionize history, you must be transformed too. Prophecy is for waking you up. The prophet accuses, giving us a picture of what he sees is the inevitable outcome of our conduct. And the prophet consoles by reminding us that God is full of compassion. Okay, so those were some of the big ideas. Now, let's get into Obadiah, the first in our series, again, which isn't following the canonical order, and we'll get back on track in the next lesson, which will be Hosea. First, let's talk about Obadiah the man. Here's what we know, which isn't much. His name means servant of God, Ovad Yah, servant of God. Obadiah, likely an Edomite convert, which is disputed, but we'll go with it, was a prophet active either in the mid-9th or late 6th century BC, which is quite a big difference of over 300 years. And he was tasked with delivering a divine smackdown to Edom. Beyond that, he's a mystery, just a name and a message. His short, focused book leaves us with more questions than answers about the man himself. Obadiah in Israel's history. The historical context of Obadiah's prophecy hinges on when it was written, and since the text doesn't pin down a precise date, we've got two plausible settings tied to Edom's hostility toward Israel, either the mid-9th century or the late 6th century BC, as I mentioned. Whether early or late, Obadiah spoke when Judah was vulnerable, invaded or exiled, and Edom was kicking them while they were down. Now, Obadiah's message. This is a short book, so it's fairly straight to the point. The message is this: justice for Edom's arrogance, mercy for God's people, and for those Edomites who leave their Edomite context. This is really why I wanted to start with Obadiah. This short, fierce oracle against Edom burns with justice, but the promise of Israel's restoration whispers mercy. The story opens with a compact, laser-focused oracle against Edom. Their pride and hostility toward Israel provoke God's judgment. They'll be brought low. It's a small but short starting point, planting the seed of divine justice against those who oppose God's people. And the brevity sets a tone. No one escapes accountability. So let's get into a brief commentary. And if you haven't read through the book yet, go ahead and pause the video now and read through Obadiah. It's short. It won't take long. All right. The prophecy begins in verse 1 with a divine call to nations to rise up against Edom, portraying Obadiah as an insider axe who will cut down his own former people. Edom's fate is destruction. The audience is ultimately urged to choose between Edom, or Esau, and Jacob, Israel. In verses 2 through 4, Edom's false greatness and pride are exposed. Despite its self-exaltation, God declares it small and despised, stripping its heavenly protection. This arrogance, rooted in Satan's rebellion, mirrors modern overconfidence in salvation without judgment. God allows Edom's rise only to ensure a greater fall, thwarting Satan's plot to replace both God and Israel. Verses 5 through 7 reveals God's judgment, enacted by Messiah as a thief in the night, extracting all holiness from Edom, leaving it powerless. Internal betrayal within Edom's ranks, fueled by the deception of prosperity, hastens its collapse. In verses 8 through 14, Edom's wisdom and might vanish, leaving no refuge as punishment for its violence, its Hamas against Jacob, standing aloof or gloating during Israel's distress, as seen in modern indifference and hostility. Think post-October 7th. Verses 15 through 16 depict a measure-for-measure judgment. Nations drink a cup of poison, mirroring their deeds against Israel, leading to their oblivion. And yet, in 17 and 18, hope emerges. A remnant in Zion survives, and Jacob, or Israel, with Joseph, picturing Messiah, burns Edom to ash, leaving no survivors. This dual messianic force, Messiah, son of Joseph, who could be considered the Gentile remnant, and Messiah, son of David, the Jewish remnant, unites to defeat Satan. We also know that Yeshua is both the son of Joseph and the son of David. Finally, verses 19 to 21 promise Israel's restoration, reclaiming its land and exiles from nations like Spain, Sepharad, that's the root of the Sephardic Jews, Spain, and France, Sarfat. The prophecy ends with liberators, the two messiahs, judging Edom on Mount Zion, establishing God's dominion. The overarching call for us today is to reject Edom's pride, to align with Jacob against Satan, and join the remnant aiding Jacob in the final battle. This is a story arc that has its beginnings in the animosity between Jacob and Esau, brothers, and ends with the remnants joining forces to finish the fight between brothers once and for all, and Messiah, son of Joseph and David, will sit on his throne. Justice and mercy from a good God. Well, that's all I have for now. I hope this has blessed you, or at least got you thinking and talking about these ideas. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Tim Pell of Beth Tikkun Messianic Fellowship. Shalom.